Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. They are Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen, and we got a lot to get into regarding Penn State's coach search, which is on day 52 now, folks. It's been 7+ weeks since James Franklin was fired by athletic director Pat Kraft following a third consecutive loss against Northwestern in Beaver Stadium. It's been 9+ weeks since James Franklin led the Nittany Lions out of the tunnel in front of a tremendous atmosphere in Beaver Stadium for a big-time showdown against Oregon as the number 2 team in the nation. And it has been 51 days since we sat in front of Pat Kraft in the Beaver Stadium media room, and he told us, quote, "I believe a new leader can help us win a national championship." Still searching for that new leader. There have been some roller coaster moments, folks, and we're going to get into all that right here on the Lions 24/7 podcast. Before we get into some of these details, I want to bring in Daniel because I have kind of been the guy that's been front and center with our coaching search board, and hopefully you are partaking in that, whether you're just lurking and kind of staying updated or whether you're engaged and dropping 3,000 comments over the course of the last 7 weeks. I know we're over 6 million views on that. We're well over 100,000 total comments. I think we're over, just getting closer. We're over 4,000 pages. I've lost track on the whole process with some of the numbers, but we're at an all-time high in subscriptions. I think this search and that thread and our hot board has been a big part of that. So I think many are familiar with where I've been on this. But Daniel, you've been, we've been communicating all the way, just like you have, Mark. Tyler Cavaruso's chimed in, but just generally, 51 days 52 days. I should be accurate here. 52 days, Daniel. A tremendous amount of conversation on the board, and yet we're right where we were on October 13th when we walked into that media room and asked questions of Pat Kraft.
Yeah, something that I'd been thinking about throughout today was after this happened and through those first initial couple of weeks, I was very much of the idea that don't rush this for the sake of the 2026 signing class. Don't even necessarily rush this for, roster retention overall. I always felt that it was more important to make the right hire for the next 10 years as opposed to making a hire to paper over the next 2, 3, 4 years. I think I was trying to take that longest view in the room. I know that right after it happened, some of our commenters and a line of thinking was, well, the top priority should be whoever can start the fastest there to keep that class of 2026 intact, to keep this roster intact, to keep things moving. The one thing that I don't think I factored in was that we would get to day 52 of the search, that we would actually get to National Signing Day without a head coach in place or even a report out there that something is imminent with someone. I didn't necessarily think this would get wrapped up by Halloween, but I did think that I'm driving back from Rutgers on Sunday afternoon. And I thought that, all right, that's going to be a time to figure out where can I stop on I-80 to potentially work? What time would I need to leave? Like that is really what I had everything focused on for a date that we would find something out. So that's come and gone. So I think at this point, the result that will speak for itself over the next however many years. But I think we're at a point now with the process that there's a lot to say about it. And I think the overall feeling is that it's hard to feel good about the process that has led Penn State to this point.
We're going to do an autopsy on the Kehlani Sitake situation, BYU's head coach, a guy who's a lifer there, essentially in Provo, and what it meant for Pat Kraft to try to pry him out. We'll get into that in just a second because obviously it didn't work out. We're still talking about a vacancy here in Happy Valley. But, Mark, I want to bring you in, and we haven't heard from you since before the Rutgers game. We're not going to ask your thoughts on the Rutgers game. If you want them, go check out our post-game podcast or go to our site. Mark has grades up, 40-36 win. Penn State's going to bowl game. We'll know which bowl game it is on Sunday. But that's really secondary right now because the future of the program is seemingly hanging in the balance because you're going to get a head coach. He's got to fill out a staff. He's got to fill out a roster. We'll talk a little bit later about how signing day turned out. But, Mark, kind of same question to you as I proposed to Daniel. Big picture, 7.5 weeks into this process, what are your thoughts?
If you're cruising down 80, the Wawa at the top of the Northeast Extension is a good place to stop, or anywhere in Hazleton, Daniel. I'll give you some good suggestions. I happy signing day, guys. I just wanted to say that as well. I mean, this is pretty much exactly what we all expected. What Daniel mentioned earlier, I think is worth repeating, that it is too early to judge. I mean, Pat Kraft could still pull a rabbit out of his hat. We don't know. I mean, the guy's not going. He's going to go down fighting. Whatever happens, he is going to go till the last second and try to make this happen. But I was with Daniel the whole time. I thought getting this done when they did it with the firing was going to give them the runway to be able to make headway and ideally have multiple different options, and it just doesn't seem as if that was the case. And again, we won't be able to have final judgment, and I know that's a bit of a cop-out, but we really have to be careful because these things are fluid and you never know what's going to happen. After championship week, what might happen? I don't know, but I'm just a little reluctant to bury Kraft at this point until we see what he ultimately comes up with. So yeah, I mean, it seemed as if they put themselves in a position where they wanted to get a lead on basically everybody else outside of Virginia Tech and Oklahoma State, maybe. And it backfired. It hasn't worked to this point. And so why were they better off doing it now in hindsight? Why were they better off doing the firing when they did it if it wasn't going to give you any sort of advantage? It doesn't look like there's any sort of advantage that was to have. That is there. And the other part is, it just looks like more recently, and I know we're going to get into this, maybe an all of your eggs in one basket approach, kind of, that is looking like it backfired. Again, let's wait and see how this all plays out. But to this point, if you're going to fairly judge it to this point, it has not worked out. And I don't know that you could be anything other than critical to this point of the way that this is played out. We're here on signing day. I mean, if the idea was to get a head start on everybody, you had to have this done before signing day. And now we're going to be beyond. I mean, now we're looking at beyond early signing period, not just signing day.
What I will say is I think it's important for us to keep two things kind of in different compartments: the decision to hire and the decision to fire. I think you made the decision, or at least what we heard from Pat Kraft, made the decision because he didn't feel like James Franklin was the guy to lead the program anymore on October 12th, coming off another lifeless victory as a 3-touchdown favorite. I should say a lifeless loss as a 3-touchdown favorite, back-to-back versions of that. However you want to make of that, the decision that Pat Kraft, I mean, was this team going to be fighting as much as we saw in November if they had kept going at that trajectory? I can't necessarily forecast that. Did it matter much? They got to 6-6. They got the bowl eligibility, but in the end, it's a wash when we were talking about the number 2 team in the country that was proudly, projecting themselves as national championship contenders for the first 9 months of the year. So there is a component here where just because I haven't hired someone doesn't mean it was the wrong decision to fire Franklin in mid-October. But I think now that we have gotten through Thanksgiving weekend, now that the carousel has spun pretty wildly, and a lot of these, if you want to do the musical chairs comparison, a lot of the seats have been filled now. Some of the bigger dominoes, I'm going to throw all the different kind of equations at you here. A lot of the things have been settled, and Penn State's still searching for an answer. And a big part of that, guys, is because they went from having what they perceived as a really stealthy success, and that turned into a pretty epic public failure as Tuesday developed. And that involved the pursuit of Kehlani Sitake from BYU, a guy who played for the Cougars as a fullback, a guy who was a team captain and a 3-year starter for BYU, a guy, as we did our research on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, as we got to know more about him, was sitting in a car with his father outside the building, listening to the PA announcer in BYU stadium and getting a feel for the game that way, because 1, they couldn't afford tickets. 2, they couldn't afford the TV package on which BYU was broadcast. But his father from Tonga, Kalani from Tonga, they relocated to the United States. They were in Provo. And there's also an aspect of this where, that there are practicing Mormons. They're a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints. And so there's a lot of things that were deep rooted here for Sitake with BYU. And he goes on to coach in his coaching career. One of the first things he did in that regard was a graduate assistant job at BYU at his alma mater. He went out and about, had a chance to go be a longtime top assistant for Utah in that state. He went to Oregon State for a year, and then he circled back when he got the head coach job at BYU in 2016. Since then, a lot of success. They were independent for a very long time. He had success in that regard, a couple 10-plus win seasons. Then they made the jump to the Big 12, and you wonder, okay, how's BYU going to adjust to this? Well, they've got back-to-back seasons now where they get to 11 victories, and they're among the few teams remaining in college football that still has a chance to punch their ticket for a college football playoff berth. This Saturday, they'll go up against Texas Tech, making their debut in the Big 12 championship game. So just to lay it out there, you've got a guy who is essentially a lifer at BYU, days ahead of the biggest game that this program has, come across in a very long time, 15 plus years probably. And Pat Kraft was trying to make a stealth move to have him essentially come on board with Penn State. Now, what I haven't gotten clarity on, and maybe we'll never get it at this point, was what happens if they beat Texas Tech on Saturday. Our understanding was, he's going to be delivered to Happy Valley after you get through that Big 12 championship game in the minds of people here. I don't know what would happen if they win that game, they get into the playoff, and then you're talking about games deep into December, right around Christmas, essentially. Where was that going to play out? But this has been going on for weeks. Now that we've had a chance to do a bit of an autopsy here, I have about a 2,000-word story that I wrote overnight, essentially Tuesday into Wednesday, because I wanted to get a lot of it out of my brain and onto our website based on a lot of the coverage we were doing. But fellas, this is one that we didn't pick up on for a while. And to the credit of Pat Kraft and his crew, they have kept things really quiet for much of this process. They've kept a lot of us guessing, bobbing and weaving throughout the process. We have no names on the radar, but we did not necessarily know that Kehlani Sitake was this far advanced in his conversations with Penn State. But as we got wind of this over the weekend, we started to really reach out to some sources, one of which, ultimately a couple of them, were out in BYU, guys who were very well connected to that program that were able to go back and forth. We told them what we were hearing from our end. They told us what they were hearing from their end. And it was very clear that there was significant discussions taking place, and they weren't just starting last weekend. They had predated that. You're talking about multiple weeks of discussions between Pat Kraft and Kehlani Sitake's representation. And when it got to Monday morning, our understanding was Sitake goes to BYU. Those officials essentially lets them know, here's what I'm going to do. I'm planning to take the Penn State job. And from there, things change in a hurry because BYU gets its counterpunch, and it's significant. But before we get to that part of the story, which is a big one, how things evolved from Monday into Tuesday, what we were hearing and checking the pulse of that, Daniel, what stands out to you about the appeal that you think Pat Kraft saw in Sitake, making a move for a guy who has never coached east of the Rocky Mountains, but is very highly respected, known as a tremendous culture builder, known as a guy who focuses on hard-nosed, tough football. We've heard that's one of the traits that Pat Kraft wants, a guy who's had success with quarterback development within that BYU program. That's another aspect that we've heard is important to Pat Kraft along this search. But this is a name that none of us really had on. If you were to write 10 or 15 names down back on October 13th, I don't think any of us were writing his down.
No, he definitely was not on my radar. I think that when you look at the college football landscape, there's a ton of guys who are out there alma maters, and we know that Penn State kicked the tires on a couple of those guys. When you think about Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, Brent Key at Georgia Tech, probably missing another alum that's mixed in there too. It's
the guy that we talked about. We might talk about again later on. Yeah, there's been guys that have that. They're not just on a campus as a mercenary, as a guy getting paid. They got history on that campus.
But then when you factor in the BYU aspect of it, that really heightens things a little bit because there's such an infrastructure there, that surrounds that university and everything that comes along with it. And Kehlani Sitake is someone who has basically been molded within that, has come up through that. When he got the head job at BYU after Bronco Mendenhall left, he hadn't coached at BYU in a while, but he had been in the state at Utah. And I think that some of the feedback that, as we learn about the landscape out there, that those staffs are very connected, and that there's, I think, a lot of familiarity, things like that. So he was someone that, when he stepped in, really knew what he was getting into. I do think from a couple of perspectives, I think that the concern about him, not being, not working east of the Rockies, not necessarily having East Coast connections. I think that's, the quote unquote, the fit. I think that those are things that can be alleviated by who you surround yourself with, and, the infrastructure that you create here. Another thing too, with football coaches is that, these guys have sat in a lot of different living rooms all over the country and talked to a lot of different people and gotten a lot of different types of people to come play for them. And even though BYU has the religious element to it, you look at that roster, they've got guys from all over. There's still connections to different places. Like, it's not one type of person that is there. And so I think if you're Pat Kraft and you're looking at all of that, I think that that's, there's a real appeal there. The one thing that I come back to is that, the idea that you are going to be the one that is going to get Kehlani Sitake out of this situation. Because Oregon tried a couple years ago and they ended up with Dan Lanning, which has worked out pretty well for them. So people have tried in the past and not been able to do it. And so I think when you talk about the process, thinking that you are the one that is going to be able to get this done, like you talked about, putting all your eggs in that basket and then not being able to, and not necessarily on the surface having a plan B. I think that catches your attention a little bit from evaluating things. But I do understand why you would have such an interest in Sitake, why he would be appealing to you. You look at how his BYU teams play, how he's coached. I mean, he lost his starting quarterback shortly before the season and had to turn to a true freshman who had, I think, transferred in over the summer, hadn't even been there in the spring. I think that is something that really stands out. So I guess the one other thing that's been on my mind that I don't want to forget too is a big what if for me is I do wonder if that flight tracker didn't get out Sunday, because I think I talked to someone else on the beat and we think that was the first time that anything, I guess, approaching smoke had been on social media about Sitake and Penn State. Like, if that doesn't get out there, are we having a different conversation today? Are we only talking about signing day? That's an interesting, I think, domino, an interesting what if for us there.
I would also note that if Pat Kraft was on the assumption they could do this stealth all the way to the finish line, like, as soon as BYU got wind of this, they were going to rally the troops. He has reached an iconic status out there because of his history as a player, because of the way he was raised to root for this program, because of his religious affiliation, which, that goes hand in hand with what you're talking about, leadership out there. But he has a lot that is intertwined within that community. And he has won a lot of football games, and people were always going to try to keep him on campus. And that's what we saw in a significant way for BYU. One more thing, though, there is a bit of a connection that I think, Mark, you can probably illuminate for us better than Daniel or I could when it comes to Penn State and BYU and the history there between their former head coach, Lavelle Hawkins, and the former Penn State coach, Joe Paterno. A lot of mutual respect there. And it's something that I was told when we first started really digging into this thing several days ago, that Sitake was well aware of that. It was part of something that was interesting to him with Penn State. And can you kind of bring that to the podcast a little bit, because you saw it firsthand?
Yeah, you mistakenly said Hawkins, which is understandable because you've been going through 800,000 different names. It's Lavelle Edwards.
Sorry.
No, just to be clear, and again, not being critical. You've been juggling enough names that you deserve a mulligan on that. But yeah, I mean, I was at the 89 Holiday Bowl. I'm trying to remember what it was, and Terry Smith actually had an unbelievable touchdown catch in that game. And even then, you could see that there was the way that those guys, they just had old school coaches, you could just see the way that they got along, and to hear that Lavelle Edwards' wife is still, around out there in Provo was pretty cool to hear. And then they signed a 2-year home and home series. So, Penn State going head to head with Ty Detmer was pretty cool to see. And a lot of respect, I think, between the two programs. And if I'm not incorrect, I heard this from somebody who's close to Tim Manoa, but that Sitake is his cousin, both from Tonga. Tim Manoa, for younger people watching, which is pretty much anybody other than me, was a great fullback on the Penn State 1986 national title team. And Penn State really has had a pretty good history for a team this far east of having very good Polynesian players, whether it's Tim Manoa, whether it's Al Pola, who, does our TV show with us once a year, Koa Farmer. I think you could throw Jordan Norwood in there because, he was a guy who his mom is Hawaiian and he was born in Hawaii, Venga this year. So there is a history there. And, obviously not to the extent of a BYU or a Utah or some of those programs, but it wasn't unprecedented. So, yeah, I mean, I think between the two programs, the two, legendary head coaches, some of that Polynesian impact here, people were wondering what are some of the connections. And then the other thing that I would say about Sitake, when you talk about recruiting, BYU cannot be the easiest place to recruit to if for folks who aren't Mormon. I mean, there are a lot of restrictions out there that you have to deal with. So if he can recruit there, I mean, the guy, that would not have been, like, to me, a glaring issue. I think Daniel hit on it. If you were able to surround yourself with the right people, and we know some of the right people are on the staff as we speak, if you're able to maintain those, I don't think that would have been an issue. But, Tyler, you and I, in all of our text messaging back and forth, what I was getting from the Penn State end of it is that they had full confidence, even as early as we're recording this on Wednesday. Is it? What day is it? I'm forgetting what day.
8:52. That's all I know anymore.
Yeah. Even early Tuesday, we're hearing full confidence, and we weren't alone. I mean, a lot of other, people
even
were
later on Tuesday from certain segments of Penn State, we were hearing full confidence.
Right.
Now, that was after we realized that things were starting to go off the rails. But when you talk about this athletic director and the people who are around him, there was some significant confidence yesterday afternoon. When we're scratching our head. Yeah, full confidence is actually the way it was phrased. When we're scratching our head, because as we'll get into a moment, there's intel coming our way on Tuesday morning while I'm having my coffee that things are not going in a good direction. And that's coming from someone who's well connected to the situation here in Happy Valley. We follow that up in Provo with people following from the BYU end, and they're like, yeah, people around here are waking up feeling good about Sitake staying here. And yet you can picture Pat Kraft whistling and up and down the hallway and just waiting for them to seal the deal.
But going back to your point, Tyler, I mean, I think they underestimated the emotional, the heart, all those things. I don't know about you guys. I don't view this as this guy from the beginning was leveraging Penn State for a raise. That it ended up being that. He ended up getting it. But I think his ties, emotionally, religiously, having gone there, I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think this was, a Lane Kiffin, carpetbagger move. I think this was a guy who thought that this was the right thing for him, but then genuinely had people saying, listen, we need you here. And I think that, and I may be naive. Call me naive if you want to, and I'm fine with that. But I think Penn State underestimated the pull that was going to be there. And I don't know how you could possibly do that. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you could have full confidence if you don't have a signature on a piece of paper. I don't know. That part of it I will never understand.
We have had other coaches take jobs in the past week, and they have conference championships to go. Maybe they have the playoffs, but they are ready to work for another program as soon as their postseason journey ends. And that's out in the public. And I don't know necessarily why that wasn't possible here. if it was, or if it was something they were going to try to pull off this week leading up to the Big 12 championship game. But what I think is very clear is there was too much confidence on the end of Pat Kraft and Penn State based on the way they handled this, because they really seemed to key in on Sitake during a very pivotal stretch when you've got the regular season ending, when you've got a lot of things opening up and a lot of people trying to make their final moves. And that musical chairs, as I said, is really starting to go at a high accelerated pace. And to be zoned in on Sitake without a signed document, and there had to be, like you said, there had to be conversation between Pat Kraft, Sitake, representation, like, hey, this is what we should all expect. Like, we should all expect BYU to put a full court press on. As soon as BYU feels like they need to, they're going to get this in a public spotlight. They're going to rally their biggest donors. They're going to rally the religious leaders, and they're going to make it feel like it was a match made in heaven, and no pun intended, but between Sitake and the BYU community. And you're right. There are some unique things there that an honor code that applies to athletes out there, and may not be much of a secret, but that honor code takes some things off the table that are some of the things that people have the most fun with during their college days. And so that's just something that's in play there. And there's also a thing where the Big 12, where is that going to be as college football evolves? What kind of spot is it going to be? Are you going to have to win the Big 12 championship to get into the playoff? Or are you going to be able to get multiple teams in, like Big 10 and SEC, 4, 5, 6 teams maybe on an annual basis? So the ability to coach at Penn State and in the Big 10, I think, was very appealing for Sitake, knowing that the support was going to be there. We're told that sources told us that north of $10 million annually for a salary, which is significant pay raise from where he was at BYU. It's still more than what he's going to get from BYU as far as we understand it. But there was a conversation had, and we also heard UCLA made at least some overtures with him going into this coaching cycle, and he wasn't all that interested in that based on what we heard. But I think Penn State gave him a chance to sit down, think about this process. And I'm with you, Mark. I don't think this was a multi-week play to force BYU's hand. I think as things got to the final stages, it may have become that. But I really do believe that, of course, I'll let you guess what that call is regarding, this coaching search. I'll get to it after we get done with it.
We're looking at our phones like, whose is it? Whose is it?
Yeah, this is how Adam Schefter lives his life every day. I want no parts of that. But I think getting back to the crux of this whole deal, I truly believe there was genuine planning that, okay, we're going to have this exit strategy. But if Pat Kraft thought he could roll into town with his blue blood status and a Penn State brand logo on his polo shirt and a big bag of cash, and he could say, hey, get in the passenger seat, we're rolling out of here, without facing significant turbulence, without having Sitake have his heartstrings pulled as hard as you possibly can imagine, then this was a big miscalculation. And that was really a lot of what I wrote last night on Lions 24/7 and trying to break down everything we heard, because as we got through Monday, it was just very apparent coming out of Provo and the conversations we were having there with people well connected that Sitake was really face-to-face with how much he means to the community, and perhaps reminded how much the community has meant to him. And when you're talking about all that emotional stuff and all the community stuff, that's one thing, but that was enhanced by a significant pay raise as well. Everyone wants to make more money. And also, from what I understand, more full control over his program, more control over being able to spend a certain amount of money in the NIL. And the church, I think people had a misconception because, LDS has a lot of money. That's no secret, but they can't specifically funnel money to the football program through the church. But you can have boosters who are all across the church. They can put their money in that coffers. And you saw most notably the crumble cookie guy step up on social media and basically blow the conch shell and be like, we need to get this guy whatever he needs. And so you had all this happening. And I think what maybe people fail to realize here is BYU had the edge. If he is weighing all this stuff, who is the one in proximity to him? Yeah, Pat Kraft has his phone number. Maybe they can hop on a FaceTime, but he has to go face-to-face with his players. He has to go face-to-face with the people in the community who've meant a lot to him. And these are the people he's going to have to say goodbye to in a matter of days. And oh, by the way, as I mentioned earlier on the show, you are days away from the biggest matchup this BYU football program has encountered in more than a decade. And so you've got all this in play. Is anyone surprised that he was swayed in a different direction here as things got to really down to crunch time and it was out there? What I was told was an emergency team meeting was called on Monday, early Monday, and it was called for later in the day. And it was, based on what I heard, it was expected to be a goodbye thing. It was expected to be a situation where it's going to be tough, but he's going to tell them he's going to lead them through this matchup. Maybe he'll explain why he's making the move, but it's emotional, but it's got to be done. Well, as those conversations took place Monday with leadership and Sitake, and it became clear that they were going to do all they could to support him, he went to that meeting and he was described by someone in that meeting to us as non-committal. He didn't say he was staying. He didn't say he was going. And so there wasn't really news coming out of that meeting. And that wasn't good for Penn State. To me, that was not a good sign because we went to bed on Monday hearing really good confidence from Penn State's end. But something that was told to me by multiple people at BYU was, he's listening. He's listening. He's thinking. And so I don't know how much sleep he got Monday night, but I'd imagine there was a lot of conversation within his household, probably some praying on the decision. And then Tuesday, you wake up to more of the same. You're in your team facility. You're on the campus that you've known as a player, that you've known as a coach, that you knew as a 7-year-old, parked with your dad in the car trying to listen to the PA announcer for BYU games because you were that much already entrenched in the culture at that age. And as Tuesday developed, we got that phone call on Tuesday from someone who is close to the approach. They have a very good understanding of where this thing is going day to day with Pat Kraft and the search committee. And they are not working for Pat Kraft. They are not directly working for or with Pat Kraft. But they let us know in no uncertain terms that it seemed like it was going sideways for Penn State. We reported that over at Lions 24/7 around 10 a.m. on Tuesday. And by the time we got into early afternoon, BYU was just sending up red flags to us. Like, hey, it is really trending in this direction. We think he's going to be staying. There's a lot of confidence brewing. There might be an announcement that he's staying by the end of the day. And lo and behold, you get the Pete Thamels of the world all of a sudden, putting that out there in social media that sounds like he's having conversations that he's not going to take Penn State's offer anymore. He's going to stay at BYU. And then by the end of the day, essentially dusk here, you've got a contract being announced, the contract extension. He's in a press conference. And he said his wife described that 48-hour period or the 36-hour period as the BYU community dropping a love bomb on them. That's tough to compete with. And as we'll get into, Pat Kraft put some other things to the side while trying to get this to the finish line. And when you don't have that signature and you're dealing with human nature and you're dealing with a guy who has this kind of depth to his roots in Provo, Daniel, I just don't see how you could be shocked by the result. And we heard from some national reporters, I heard from some people locally yesterday that they were essentially stunned that it worked out this way. And in my mind, it's like when you're drawing out the map to possibilities of why this could go awry, this had to be number one for you, especially without a signed contract, especially without a public commitment. Maybe if Sitake puts out that he is going to Penn State and he's got his word out there publicly, but as far as anybody else across the world understands it, that was simply an agreement between a couple of dudes.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Mark was saying about how you have this plan in place. And from what we understand and what you have in your story, Tyler, it was a pretty comprehensive plan of how things were going to go in terms of staffers, roster pieces, recruiting class.
Yeah.
Like
we were talking about a situation where maybe you get toward a dozen commitments with a big help from BYU's class. I mean, there was a lot of pieces in place, and I think people would have been very satisfied with some of what we heard about the staff retention. So this thing was far along. There was structure in place, yet there was no signature in place.
Yeah, and I'm gonna mix cliches here. It's like they had everything except T's weren't crossed, I's weren't dotted, and then it's also like the best laid plans. Things can go awry pretty quickly. And I think that they did it. I mean, they did a great job of keeping things airtight, keeping things, under wraps as long as they could. But yeah, I mean, I think that in that situation, you have to be planning for that. What if this gets out? What if BYU does put the full court press on him? And I think it's also an example of, human nature. I know that there's a certain element of people that when you talk about sports, and I feel like we run into it sometimes when talking about recruiting decisions or coaching decisions and whatnot, that it doesn't always come down to the bottom line, and it doesn't always come down to maybe what the situation looks like, because, like you said, Tyler, lot of zeros on that check for the salary. You look at what Penn State has in place in terms of being in the Big Ten, the stability that you have, at least in terms of conferences moving forward, that sort of certainty in this landscape. I mean, on paper, everything seems like it lines up, even when you factor in that he's an alum and that he has ties to it. Like, I don't necessarily think on paper anyone would fault him for making this decision. But that human element is something that you always have to factor in, and the emotional side of things can really rear its head. I think the other thing too is that I don't really care what coach it is, what school they're at, if they're an alum or not. If you're operating on the timeline that Penn State was in the situation where, like, it seemed like things were buttoned up on Saturday, Sunday, and you're trying to get to the next Saturday, the next Sunday, like, that is, in this industry, in this age,
That's naive to me.
that's such a long time.
Yeah.
And you leave out the possibilities for so many things to go wrong. And it can be anything, like we just saw, the tiniest little bit of information out there, and house of cards can fall down, to mix in another metaphor cliche. So I think that there's a lot of things about this in terms of, like, I think the end result was shaping up to be something that, I mean, I was coming around on it by Tuesday afternoon, looking into Sitake, thinking about staffing, recruiting, roster retention, other, like, the infrastructure. I was like, yeah, I can see it. I wasn't really concerned about the fit stuff because, ball is ball at a certain extent. And Kehlani Sitake, a really good ball coach.
Daniel, can I add something else selfishly from our perspective? I think I passed this along to you.
Yeah.
I was buying into this because I heard he has 3 open practice periods a week, and they're each a half hour. And I also hear he gets together with reporters in social functions that are pretty informal, and that's just something we didn't have in recent years here at Penn State. So I was like, all right, I'll put 10 toes down on the ground on this one.
And the coordinators are available every week, from what I understand.
What could have been?
Yeah.
I know. As soon as we were all coming around, it fell apart. Hey, one thing I would throw in, guys, listen, when was this thing going to be signed? I mean, Daniel mentioned it at the top of the show.
Yeah.
Okay, so say they win the Big 12 title game. Is he all of a sudden going to say, okay, I'm signing now?
Mark, remember the feedback that you and I got on Tuesday afternoon, the final burst of confidence from Penn State's inner workings, and the way it was phrased to us was, well, it's not technically signed yet. It's got to get reviewed by the board of trustees. Plus, he's going to coach this game on Saturday. So I'm thinking, I know Texas Tech is the favorite here, but if they win, they've got another game, and it's going to be in late December. And if you thought it was going to be hard to get this guy to walk away from a Big 12 championship, how about BYU's playoff debut? It's a great point that you bring up there.
And that's why I can't believe. I mean, you're talking about paying a man $10.5 million. Was that the number that, like, we
heard north of 10? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can't get him to put pen to paper. I mean, I don't even. You said it. This was naive to think that you were going to be able to get this to the finish line without some sort of pushback. And again, when was he going to sign? I mean, I just don't. You start looking at this, and it's like, did they just think things were going to magically fall into place? I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to kind of understand what the line of thinking was here. And unfortunately, I don't think Kraft is ever going to be held accountable to answer these questions. I mean, I think we could ask them at some point, but I would highly doubt that he's going to answer them after the hire is made, whoever it may be.
His response will be, we're going to focus on our guy today. And he was our guy all along. That's going to be typical conversation there whenever he introduces the next guy. But Daniel, I'll go back to you in a second because I'm not sure if we kind of derailed what you were saying there. But I think that you saw some players speaking up yesterday, and I know some of these people respond to me on Twitter and was like, why should we listen to the players? They're players on the most disappointing Penn State team ever. Well, Pat Kraft back in October 13th said he fired James Franklin because he owed that to the players, because that's what he was doing a service to the locker room, because the trajectory of the program needed to be somewhere else to win national championships, and he owed it to them. Well, if the players are now coming out and speaking up a little bit, I think we owe it to them to at least listen. And King Mac came out with a tweet or an X post or whatever we want to call those things on Tuesday evening as this all fell apart and BYU was announcing the extension. And he said, making this harder than it's got to be. And I think that statement right there resonated across a lot of Nittany Lions nation, because in my opinion, Pat Kraft couldn't have gone through the 136 FBS teams and have picked a coach who has deeper emotional and personal roots on their current school than Kehlani Sitake. I think that's the primary reason that I'm surprised, that they're surprised. And that, when BYU makes a last-ditch effort with a program legacy, a guy who's kind of an icon and certainly is now an icon, he had yet to sign a contract. He was days away from that big game. To me, that this is just something, maybe there's a few guys that you could say are comparative in terms of their emotional ties to their campus and their personal ties to the campus, but you essentially picked one of the toughest coaches in college football from one of the more unique or the most unique culture in college football, and you tried to pry him away. I don't know how you can be surprised that you didn't pry him away.
With Lavelle Edwards' wife getting involved. Yeah, on one side you have Pat Kraft, on the other side you have Mrs. Edwards. I mean, it's like an Animal House. The two people whispering in both ears. I mean, and I'm not even joking. I mean, could you imagine the emotional pull that this woman would have?
His coach, the legendary coach at BYU, who I got the wrong last name for earlier. Yeah, his widow is speaking on Monday with Sitake. That's part of that full court press.
It might as well have been grandma, right? I mean, seriously, that's how close people are to their coaches.
They've got the crumble cookie guy who writes checks for field storming fines, and then they've got the leadership council from the religious wing of this stuff. And say what you will about football, but most people will put their religious or their relationship with God over the sport. And so you had all that working against you if you're Pat Kraft, where I think what you really had working for you was, hey, we're a blue blood brand, we're in the Big Ten, and look at all this money. Daniel, get back to you. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think where I was winding up to is just that, this process, kind of like I said at the top, that there's a lot of different holes that you can poke in it. And I think, when James Franklin was the coach, he made that big deal about you have to have you have to have a plan for every single situation that can arise. And sometimes we saw firsthand that there weren't necessarily plans in place when certain things happened. But I think that overall mindset, I think, really shaped the program. And it does not feel like that going into this situation with Kehlani Sitake, that Penn State, that Pat Kraft, that these decision makers had those different off ramps and those different what ifs. If something gets wrong, if the flight gets leaked, if something else comes up, if all these different BYU donors decide to step up. Matt Brown, who writes the Extra Points newsletter and has been posting on Blue Sky about this, he has a report up 5 minutes ago that he doesn't think the crumble cookie guy was in the top 5 donors behind this, given that BYU has a ton of donors in a lot of different spaces. A lot of MLM money in there as well. But that's just if you're Pat Kraft, that's going to be the narrative now, that you got beat by the cookie guy, in this process.
Tobias Harris is off the hook for crumble cookie finally.
Yeah. And, you saw it where some BYU fans got crumble cookies delivered to the athletic administration building last night. James Franklin has crumble cookie at his, his Virginia Tech presser today. I mean,
some product placement and Virginia Tech signing day festivities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of hurt pride. I hate the saying that when you distill something down to say oh, this isn't a good look. I hate that phrase and think it's such a cop out. But college sports and especially football is such a perception-based industry, business, whatever whatever you want to call it. We see it every week with the college football playoff rankings, and how perception plays into that. And it's just, I think Penn State has just put itself in a really, really tough spot right now, where it's really hard to see where you go from here. And it feels like it was avoidable in certain respects. Like, to get that far down the road, I understand the confidence, everything like that. But to just leave that door open a little bit, and to not think that, hey, if BYU gets wind of this, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to go. Is just tough. Like, I don't know technically, what piece of paper he could have signed, that at the juncture that they had everything in line. I don't know what needs approval. I don't know what lawyers need to look at, whatever. But I think to leave whatever meeting that was, or to leave that situation on a handshake, and then it doesn't matter if you're doing it with the most honest person in the world. Like, things can change, things happen, and you got to be ready for it. And, like, you just can't leave it on that.
Yeah, I think there's a real possibility that Sitake was being honest with Pat Kraft when he gave him the nod. And then there's a real possibility that days later he was being honest with himself about that was not the right move for him. He belonged in Provo. That's where he was. And, hey, he's going to get a nice pay raise as well. We were told not quite as much money that he would have gotten at Penn State, but I'll just pass along a quote that we got from someone who was a great source for us, and I hope we were a good source for them along the way too. Out there at BYU, someone who's been connected to that program for a very long time, predating Sitake's regime as head coach. He passed along a line, if I can track it down here. He said, BYU is just too much a part of who Kalani is to leave. I think PSU's offer was better, but BYU made theirs good enough that staying home and building a legacy mattered most in the end. And we've talked, guys, a lot about parallel pathing over the course of this thing. I'm not going to just pretend that Pat Kraft was just on a one-on-one dialogue with Sitake down the stretch here. We know that Mike Elko was a big swing for them, whether he's 1A, 1B along the way, whatever. But I know that he was a priority target for them. And I think if Texas A&M maybe loses a game early to Notre Dame, let's say, and then picks up a loss in SEC play, and they're at 7-2 instead of 9-0, maybe the door's open there for you to bring him here. And he's a guy with Northeast roots, and I think a lot of that made sense, but didn't make a lot of sense for Elko when you're unbeaten, and Texas A&M has those deep pockets for you to leave in that point. You've already got a program ready for a playoff push. Kalen DeBoer, we understand, was one of the initial names that Pat Kraft brought to Penn State's highest leadership. And when he decided to make the move to fire Franklin in terms of viable options, he viewed Kalen DeBoer as one of those options. And I think we all got the sense in the few days after James Franklin's firing, and really before that Friday night massacre in Minnesota for Nebraska, that Matt Rule was an easy layup maybe in the view of Kraft, the guy he already had a great relationship with, the guy who was from State College High School, wore a Nittany Lions uniform. And then that got blown up, and Nebraska really, really did not play well down the stretch. Starting quarterback gone or not, they did not look good. There's not much to sell there. And so I think you also look at the other rung of the tier. Now, Sitake proved to be the mystery man, right? I was mentioning mystery Marcus last week. Marcus Freeman is still a door they knocked on. And they knocked a few times on Marcus Freeman's door. He doesn't have that extension signed yet with Notre Dame. He's going to get a pay raise, or he's going to go to the NFL if he leaves that campus, I think. But when you look at the maybe the next rung of the ladder, and Sitake was the mystery man, but Bob Chesney is the name that I think really you wonder about now moving forward as things get settled a little bit, and as he eventually makes his way out to Pasadena and coaches out there for UCLA. Bob Chesney is a guy who's a Pennsylvania native, a guy who that means a lot to him. He's down at JMU. He replaced Curt Cignetti. He worked his way up the ladder, Division II success, FCS success, really paid his dues as a head coach at those levels. What scares you a little bit is, unlike Cignetti, who put in a lot of time as an assistant coach in the power conference level, Chesney doesn't have that background. He's been a head coach. He's worked his way up. JMU is the highest level of football he has coached at. He's done a damn good job. He's another one who could sneak into the playoff if he can win the Sun Belt Championship this weekend and get some help from other things in the playoff scene. But he could get JMU to the playoffs, and UCLA's agreement with him, which we've heard it might be signed, might not be signed, but we've been told by several sources that it's done, that he is moving forward, and he's been recruiting on behalf of the Bruins, trying to put together a recruiting class, that he is looking forward to his time out there in Los Angeles. He was plan B from what we gather here, and they try to keep him that way. And the phrase I kept bringing up on our message board on all these updates about Chesney, and I don't know if I brought it up on the podcast last week, but he was getting slow played by Penn State. And there was a dynamic where perhaps he was slow playing UCLA because he wanted to wait to get the verdict from Penn State. But it came to a point where shit or get off the pot, right? And he had to make a move for himself. And I think he also sensed, where it was for Penn State, what signals they were giving him, the confidence maybe that they had with somebody else who was on a higher rung of their ladder. And what you're going to get is Chesney making the move to the Big Ten as soon as JMU's season's over. But he's going to do that with UCLA. And there's a real chance here where if Penn State doesn't get this hire right, and what that means is not anything that comes out in the next couple of months. It means, are they winning games in 2026 and 2027? That's what getting the hire right means. If they don't get it right, and Bob Chesney's out there doing something special out of UCLA, making them more respectable, maybe bringing some recruits from his wheelhouse here in Pennsylvania and the Mid-Atlantic and kind of getting in your craw that way, this is something that they could really rue screwing up. And I'm not saying they screwed up because if they were convicted on Sitake, well, they were. But at the same time, it might have cost you Chesney. And from what we understand, it's not just that he's locked in with UCLA at this point. It's also that he may have been rubbed the wrong way by how this process ultimately played out. There's only so long you can get that feeling that you're being slow played, that the person that you want to be with is keeping their eyes on the dating app more than they're keeping their eyes on you. And so, Mark, I think that's a storyline along the way. And I think it's something that's bothering people on our message boards a bit, is not only did you fail to secure Sitake with this big stealthy surprise maneuver you were trying to orchestrate, but when that didn't happen, there wasn't a pivot moment where by the end of Wednesday or by the end of Tuesday or by Wednesday morning, you're like, don't worry, we got this guy and we love him. Because that guy may have been Bob Chesney, and that guy is no longer available to you. And he's out recruiting to build his next class that's going to come to the Big Ten. You've got no one recruiting as head coach for your team here at Penn State. And I think it's twofold in that way. You talked about eggs in the basket. This really gets to that point.
Yeah, it's not just him. I mean, listen, look at the situation Terry Smith is in. I mean, they've gone through all of these different people and nothing's worked out. And meanwhile, all the fans are clamoring for Terry Smith and the players are clamoring for Terry Smith. And I mean, it's like he's an afterthought. And I don't know how you handle that differently, but when you're the AD, that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, you can't just be so narrowly focused on getting one guy and hoping it happens. I mean, I guess it was more than hope. I mean, I'm sure he was extremely confident, but we see where that gets you. So yeah, I mean, a guy like Chesney, Coal Region, that's where I'm from. So I like the guy already, but we had heard that he had been in agreement with UCLA for weeks. But again, I don't think anything was officially signed. And as you mentioned, maybe slow playing it to see what sort of love you're going to get from Penn State. And when you don't get that, I mean, that's the balancing act of being a top AD. I mean, this isn't the first time that an athletic director has had to juggle these sorts of things, but it's almost looking like it's the first time that Kraft has at this level, because it is obviously, right? Yeah. So, and that's where, again, I think we have to hold out final judgment until the hire is made. And then we can say, well, yeah, maybe he did have something in his back pocket that we didn't know about. Maybe things will spin a different way that, last week at this time, I don't think we would have envisioned where we are right now. Is that fair to say?
I had a feeling that by maybe this Wednesday, we'd be in the Beaver Stadium media room hearing from Pat Kraft and his new hire. And then we'd be getting the ball rolling about staff hirings and roster retention and all that stuff. But no, we are not there.
Right. So my point being, things could still change. But as I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, if we're judging by what's happened to date, it has not been good. It has not been a good look. I mean, national media people are coming after Kraft pretty hard. People are kind of making light of the program. I mean, none of that is a good look. So if he's able to somehow, again, pull a rabbit out of his hat and make this all work and get somebody who, everybody's respectful of. And I guess the other thing now is, now what's your timeline? I mean, now are you forced to wait until some of these other coaches are done in the playoffs and maybe hope? I mean, and that's where I go back to the other thing I said earlier. I mean, this guy he's going to go down fighting. I mean, he is just not going to, roll over and say, okay, we're going to do whatever. I mean, he's still going to be aiming high. I'm sure of that. I would never criticize this guy's get after it and confidence and cockiness. And I don't even mean that in a bad way. But I don't even know, what is the timeline now? I mean, I would assume it has to be before the portal opens, right? I would assume.
I mean, so the portal opens about a month from now, early January. But if you are, let's say they're waiting it out to see, maybe they have some irons in the fire, and let's kind of turn the page on what's next, because if he still wants to do his best Captain Ahab impersonation, well, maybe Alabama loses in the SEC championship game. Maybe the committee leaves them out of the playoffs. Maybe Alabama fans are pissed enough, and that toxic stuff we talked about. And it was close against Auburn. It was closer than I think a lot of people expected for Kalen DeBoer, and he seemed pretty emotional after that matchup. Do you continue to pound on that door one more time? Does Pat Kraft have a sense where there's an opening there, or is he just getting played again as a leverage deal? And I've heard more people come out since last week and checking with some sources at a national level and saying they think that people here close to Penn State may have been seeing some fool's gold with Kalen DeBoer. It may really just be getting as much as he can out of the Alabama situation, if he could do that. Still, I believe that if he were to be left out of the playoffs, it could get ugly for him. But ultimately, again, that's Captain Ahab chasing the white whale, and we're in December. And that's concerning if you're still in that pursuit and you don't have a strong read that your harpoon is going to connect with your target, because that leaves you in a quandary. We just got word a couple hours ago, Brent Key from Georgia Tech has signed an extension. He's a guy that, again, 4-year starter at Georgia Tech. He's been there as a long time as an assistant. He's had success now as a head coach. They didn't finish the season all that great, but he's a name that has been on the list. Pat Kraft's mix for a while. He's now got an extension with his alma mater. And then we just saw some reporting, I believe, from Pete Thamel of ESPN that Jeff Brom, we talked about really more around Halloween about him being a name to monitor here, and some things that could be appealing about Penn State to him and some things about him that will be appealing to Penn State. He's a guy that kind of surfaced here in the last 48 hours. Like, okay, is he a guy you now turn to? Well, the Thamel report is that he's going to be locked in with Louisville. Now, no word of a contract extension. There's been long rumored contract extension for him at Louisville. They didn't finish the season great either, but sounds like he's staying put at his alma mater, which, again, if you're trying to pry people away from campuses, he's got like 4 family members on his staff. His dad was a quarterback for Louisville. He's in the Ring of Honor as a quarterback for Louisville. So good luck with that pursuit. And that leaves you starting to wonder, okay, there's a random nature to this, but there's also these names are being floated to us a bit. Brian Dable. Anyone excited about that one? New York Giants coach fired midseason. He is someone who would guarantee that you're not getting any roster carryover in terms of a coach bringing players from the roster he's leaving. You're not getting that from Brian Dable.
Maybe you can get Abdul Carter back. Things aren't going right well for Abdul. Bring him back for another year.
Manny Diaz is a name I know some people are clamoring about now. We actually had him on our initial hot board, and then we heard not a peep about him for about 3 or 4 weeks into this process, and I took him off the hot board. And he has a little bit of history with Pat Kraft. You want to talk about Pat Kraft being left at the altar? That happened at Temple, and that was after the marriage was consummated. And then Miami came calling, his hometown team. He went down there. He led the Hurricanes, ultimately was fired there to Penn State, and now the head coach at Duke. And although they haven't had the prettiest record put together win-loss wise, they're playing in the ACC championship this weekend. And then Terry Smith is probably the name that, Daniel, I'm going to finish off, because right now I just don't want to – I mean, Matt Campbell, some people have been campaigning there, but he's not a name that has really come up locally here for us. And that continues here into Wednesday. Maybe he starts to surface more. I actually had someone from Iowa State reach out to me today who I was in touch with earlier in the process, and they were like, Penn State ever going to take a look at Campbell? And I'm like, as far as I know, not yet. If not now, when is kind of the question, I suppose. So unless Pat Kraft has, again, this plan to go get a whale or plan to make this big swing, however you want to describe it, and shock everybody and come out of this with like, oh, look, I had it figured out all along. It's going to be someone that I think people will look at and say, is he better than James Franklin? And Terry Smith, though, is a guy that we've seen the campaigning for, whether it's the planes flying in Piscataway, the signs being passed around in Beaver Stadium, the chants in Beaver Stadium, the commentary from Michael Robinson on a national broadcast. We know where a lot of people stand with Terry Smith in and around the program, but I have yet to really get a sense that he is being seriously, and I want to emphasize seriously, considered by Pat Kraft to be the head coach. In my feedback that we've gotten, he would prefer Terry Smith to be the highest ranking lieutenant in the team facilities, not the general in team facilities. And I've said it before. We talked about it a few weeks ago after the Nebraska game when emotions were high. I do wonder if you're to the point where there is a level of maybe disrespect felt on Terry Smith's end, where he says, I love Penn State. It's always going to be an important place to me. But where things are right now, I think I'm going to go take my chances on another campus and build my brand, whether that's with James Franklin or somebody else. And you want to talk about things unraveling for what they might look like in 26. If you don't have a coach for the next couple of weeks and all of a sudden Terry Smith's working his way to the exit door, boy, does that present a lot of problems for you. So, Daniel, some names there. I don't know if you have any names to add, but where do you think Pat Kraft's situation is as he comes up for air here on Wednesday, December 3rd? And now that the Lane Kiffin circus has left town, a lot of that national spotlight is landing on him.
Yeah, I think whatever the next hot board is, it's probably going to have to be 1.1. I think we might have to start from scratch a little bit here. Yeah, I mean, you see the different names that are floating around right now, and you do wonder if you reach out, if you cast a line, would somebody bite? Would Matt Campbell, potentially be interested? I mean, I think given the fact that he hasn't left Iowa State yet, it's clear that he is looking for something in particular. And given how things have gone at Penn State these past couple of weeks and, what Penn State looks like now, if you're, holding out for the perfect situation, I don't necessarily know if Penn State is that situation for you. And I think that might be applicable to some other coaches who are out there. I mean, you talk about Manny Diaz playing for an ACC championship. Like, they're 7-5. That defense was not good this year. He's supposed to be the defensive mind. Like, if he hadn't been Penn State's defensive coordinator, like, I don't necessarily think we would be talking about him as a candidate with that resume. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to be an interesting couple of days. I mean, none of the names that can really be floated, maybe it'll be like a Sitake situation where the more you sit with it, the more you think about it, the more you come around with it. But, I mean, like Brian Dable's name, like, my knee jerk to that is just like, why? Like, I don't necessarily see that working. And if you get
he was on Saban's staff for 1 year at the college level 8 years ago. He's got this whole thing figured out and what it likes to run a college institution, right?
Yeah, and he was coaching your most prominent NFL alum when things ended pretty poorly. And I think just I think there's a big ESPN story after Dable's firing about how he was acting.
Accountability issues, it sounded like, from that story.
Yes, and that does not sound like someone that you want to bring into your building and have. So I don't really know like where you go from here. Maybe this is when you finally try to get creative, that you think even further outside of the box than the most entrenched coach in college football. So we'll see. I mean, I'm going to be interested to see what we hear over these next couple of days. I know that we'll be casting a wide net. That wide net will continue to get even wider at this point with names and stuff, and we'll see how it settles in. With Terry Smith, like we talked about it after the game on Saturday, is a very different tone that he came into that media room with. He sort of acknowledged I think he called it his energy from after the Nebraska game and how he approached that. And so, yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like he is really, really on the radar. I think, I made the point where I was like, he was an interview that you should have had done in October, during the bye week, if you were going to seriously consider him and find a place for him. So, he hasn't really been on my radar, I think, but yeah, we'll see. I'll be checking the board just like everybody else for a little while.
Yeah, maybe by the time you hear this podcast, we'll have a significant update, but just not sensing in this moment that it's one of those busy days. There's been a field of those busy days lately, and it feels like a more of a reset day, which I know is frustrating for people here where we are on the calendar. You've got the clock ticking down on the early signing period, and I just want to show some love to our guy, Tyler Calvaruso, who's really had to take the brunt in terms of coverage of tracking the decimation of Penn State's recruiting class. They had, I believe, the top-ranked the number one ranked 2027 recruiting class. That went by the wayside very fast after James Franklin was fired. That has no commits anymore. And then they had around 25 commits, I think, at one point here for the 2026 class. Pretty good group of players. A lot of guys that we got in-person evaluations on during prospect camps this summer. They signed 2 players last I checked here on National Signing Day. There was no big streaming presentation from the Lash building. Normally, I get a chance to go on there and join it and give my analysis of the class. Didn't get the invite this year. I don't think there was a show this year. And, a little bit of a curveball. We have coverage of it at Lions 24/7. But Peyton Falzone, familiar name, recircled back, and he's in the class again, quarterback from in the state. He spent time committed to Virginia Tech early in the process, then committed to Penn State, then committed to Auburn, finishes committed to Penn State. He's someone, as we discussed a few times during the course of this summer and seen him a bunch of times at Penn State camps at Elite 11, very raw talent. Not a finished product by any means as a passer, a guy that we think we could do a lot of good things as a tight end potentially, but a hell of an athlete, really good personality, the kind of kid you gravitate toward. But check out our coverage at Lions247.com because that's the most significant thing. And then I know a guy who's already getting a lot of love among Nittany Lions fans, Jackson Ford, who is the only guy who stuck with his commitment from really start to finish in this process, an in-state edge rusher. We'll get Tyler Calvaruso on the next episode of this podcast, give him some love in person here on the next episode, but we'll get his take on how things went. I don't know what the number was, but a ton of guys that we perceived as future Penn State players will be wearing Virginia Tech jerseys next year as college freshmen, following James Franklin to that campus. And then many others are scattered across the country, someone to Bill Belichick in North Carolina. But as we said, 2 guys signed. The transfer portal's window's a month away. You don't have a head coach, and you can understand the consternation right now among Nittany Lions fans and at our message board and all that. Either of you have anything else to add before we step away? I think we've done our best to bring that big mammoth thread from Lions247.com into podcast format.
Yeah, I would hope they would make a decision on Terry Smith soon. You know what I mean? I mean, like either say we want you or whatever. But, to me, I look out there and where we're at now, if not Terry Smith, who is a better option at this point? I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at this situation and scratching my head, but if it's not going to be him, I think you need to tell him and let him do, if his goal is to stay here and be an assistant, great. If not, let him go about his way and find another gig, and he'll do a great job wherever he lands. But as somebody who's known Terry Smith for a long time, we hit on this a little bit earlier. This seems like he's been kind of disrespected, and I think he deserves better than that. I'm not saying that you have to make him a head coach, but at some point make your decision on Terry and then go from there. So I know that's a pretty strong statement, but I look at what he's done for the program and what he's done for the players in this program, and I think he deserves to be treated with more respect from this athletic director and from this school.
It's worth saying if he was offered, say, the associate head coach role, cornerbacks coach, get all that back, recruiting coordinator, but like why would he commit to that right now when he doesn't know who his boss is going to be? Like,
right, but make your decision. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't be putting this guy in, like, oh yeah, maybe if everything falls apart, you'll be the guy. No, either do it or don't do it. At some point, make your decision. He's given enough to the program that he deserves that level of respect, and that's coming from somebody who's known him for a long time, admittedly, and there's bias on my part with him. But I am just saying it that I think there are a lot of people out there who are viewing it the same way, that this guy has done so much for the program that I think he deserves to be treated with more respect than he's been treated with by the athletic department.
And if he knows he's not the next head coach, and that very well may have already happened, that means guys around him know. That means I think players are starting to know. And how are they perceiving what they're witnessing unfold this week, knowing that he was told no, and Pat Kraft is now scrambling around and kind of the laughing stock of the college football universe right now? That's not going to do wonders for you in terms of roster retention. Daniel, anything else to throw on top of this?
Yeah, I would add to that and say that, based on, what we heard from some players in the immediate aftermath of James Franklin's firing, Pat Kraft wasn't necessarily the most popular person in that locker room to begin with.
Yeah.
And that was 52 days ago. For where we are now. Tyler, I would just say that we talked about your process a little bit before we started recording. And I think for the people that have listened this long, I think they might appreciate a little peek behind the curtain of, how you've put all this together, how Lions 24/7 has gone about this.
Yeah, we have not been coy, and we've probably been too much of an open book at times in what we've passed along in terms of information. And that's okay. We'll own that at different times. But when we hear things, we're going to let you know. That's why you're on the site. That's my first time being involved in a coaching search. I know it hasn't happened here in a long time, generally on the Penn State beat. And so we decided to take the approach that every step of the way, we're going to track down every name that we think is out there. Because if we're hearing a wide net's being cast, why would we not be casting a wide net in our coverage? And look, you saw it this week. I think we were giving you almost a minute. My phone's, again, this coaching search, day 52, we were given, I think, as much of a finger on the pulse presentation on Monday and Tuesday of what was really happening as best we could between BYU, Penn State, and in the middle, Kehlani Sitake. And I'm very proud of that because we painted a pretty broad picture of what we were hearing from within Penn State, from in Provo, and then some national people chiming in and helping direct us in certain places. And that's been huge. And I think it's just, I said this earlier, it's a slippery slope if you're going to rely on just the local stuff, because there's a lot of there's a specific angle and spin being played up. And again, when we checked in with sources yesterday afternoon with people who were close to the Pat Kraft situation and on the payroll for the Pat Kraft situation, it was 100% confidence. It was full confidence. That was not the read in other conversations that we had over the course of the day. So I think that was a reinforcement on my end, at least, like, hey, when you're talking to this many people, not everything is going to be accurate, but I would much rather us try to paint with a very broad brush and give a full scope view than have kind of a tunnel vision on this thing and a narrowed focus. And right now it feels like it's a big reset for just about everybody covering this. Like, I'm checking in with national sources and they're like, okay, what's next? And I'm like, well, I thought I was going to get that answer from you. Maybe. No one really knows what's happening right now. And if they do, I think they're probably blowing smoke. And so, look, we will bring it to you at lions247.com. It has put me in a manic state. I told Daniel I was writing last night. It was like 3 a.m. in the morning on a Wednesday in December. It felt like I was coming off a top 10 matchup in Beaver Stadium in prime time, to be putting that kind of an effort into like a 2,000-word story. But hell, hopefully this will be the only coaching search we cover for a long time around here. And I'm all in on it. And sometimes it may look like I'm a little too all in on it, but we want to give the best play-by-play. We're not shy about sharing it on social media. And that's just the way we do it. I think that, we are kind of pretty rabid dogs with this whole situation. And, Mark, I don't know if you have anything else to add on top of that, but I just thank my wife and my 4-year-old daughter, who I fully intend to help build a snowman with later. They have both been extremely patient with me, especially during Thanksgiving weekend. I'm looking like the asshole I never wanted to be, like on my phone, scrolling, ignoring my family and trying to do the double thing, trying not to miss the next update in Penn State world. But I feel like we owe it to our subscribers. I feel like we kind of owe it to ourselves as just trying to report in this moment. And I just hope this thing ends soon so I can get back to a little bit of normalcy, some sanity, and giving you coverage of the actual team that is here on campus and has another game to play.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that different people cover things different ways. And we're not saying our way is right or wrong. It's what we're choosing to do. It's the way we want to go about it. And what that is mining as many sources as we can and then funneling things that Tyler is able to be the voice, because we think that's important, because sometimes you get into a situation where you have too many people posting stuff.
Yeah.
And it's contradictory, where thank you, Tyler, for being able to go through everything and mesh it into something that's presentable.
I get the big parade when we're right. I get the egg on my face if we're wrong, but it is a collaborative effort behind the scenes. Absolutely.
Well, people blame everybody else when it's wrong. Give Tyler the credit when it's right, because he's pulling all of this stuff together. But I just want to be clear that there are different ways to cover things, and this is the way we're choosing to do it. I think the feedback we've gotten is tremendous. I think the number of people who are reading it and paying attention has been magnificent. And the last thing I would say is just thank you to our VIP subscribers, because this is a tricky time for Penn State football. And I'm not saying this bragging. We continue to reach all-time highs in subscriptions, and that's because of these great subscribers who are, we're trying to be there to put the news out there, but they want to be part of this. None of it's easy for Penn State. None of it's easy for the fans, but they're invested. And I just think it's been very cool that they've shown that kind of support for the site, and really, for the team going through this difficult part. This isn't easy, but fans are still just intensely focused on this stuff. So it has been tricky. And I don't want to say it's been fun, because fun isn't the right word, but it's been challenging. And it's been, I think when we come out the other side of this, I think we're going to be able to look back and have a good deal of pride for what we've been able to do kind of as a team and as a community, which I think is really the ultimate part of it.
I think we'll be better for it. And I ultimately think that we'll have a kind of a burgeoning group of people that have a better sense of how we report on things, how we converse with them. And so we are glad if you're part of that. If you're not, might as well mention 75% off gets you VIP access for a full year. So you're talking about not just whatever happens here, wrapping up the coaching search, but everything that's going to happen after that, which is going to be really interesting. The roster, the staff, eventually spring ball, but you're covered through next season. You're covered through the entire 2026 regular season. However it rolls, you can follow it all at Lions 24/7, 75% off. We've given you a lot. I actually got to get over to a CBS TV hit to talk about this coaching search. It never ends anymore. But on behalf of Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen, I am Tyler Donahue, and this has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.